Well, good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the Axon Johnson Centre for the Study of Classical Architecture here at the University of Cambridge. I'm Frank Salmon, the director of the centre. I think most people in the room today know that, but welcome to people online who may be joining us for the first time. You're very welcome to this sixth seminar in the Lent Term 2023 series. And I should just say, if you are watching online and would like to pose our speaker today very difficult questions at the end of his talk, then if you type them into chat, we will do our best to table those so that he can address them. It's a great pleasure, therefore, to welcome today's speaker, friend and colleague, Ross Sharpe, a partner in Yangu Architects, a very good Greek Cypriot name, appropriate to a classical architecture centre. But Yangu, where Ross is a partner, don't solely practice classical architecture. They are pretty omnivorous in what their range is. It's a large practice with a great range of different idioms being used. But today, Ross is going to talk to us about, well, I think your original topic was from Scroope, Terrace to Triglyphs.
Yes, exactly.
So that tells us something, because anybody who knows anything about the Cambridge Department of Architecture will know that Scroope Terrace is where it is situated. Yeah. So Ross was indeed here as a student, did his diploma here and an MPhil here. And so he's a Cambridge man, and we're very much looking forward to hearing how he got from Scroope Terrace, where I'm sure he wasn't allowed to even describe a stone Triglyphs, let alone to
absolutely
design one, to how he got to where he is today. So Ross, please join me in welcome Ross Sharpe.
Thank you very much, Frank. That's a lovely introduction. Oh, good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be here. And again, my sincere thanks to Frank and Elizabeth for inviting me today. As I was saying to Frank, I can't remember actually setting footing down in college in all the 3 years I was here. So it's a bit of an irony. It's the only classical college, and I never set foot in it. I think in some ways it was the eclectic architectural chaos of so many of the other colleges that might have been my inspiration in life. So I blame them for that. Anyway, I've called the talk from Scroope Terrace to Stone Triglyphs, as I wanted to give an overview of what it was like to be here at an interesting period in the late 1980s, and how the very, very first glimpses of an acceptance of the relevance of tradition became a bit of a lifeline to me, to be honest, in what could have been a pretty hostile place for those who believed in classicism. I often think of the irony of Professor David Watkin being based only about 100 feet or so away from what was indeed called, to quote one observer, the most Stalinist school of architecture in Britain. So I actually started my education up in Glasgow at the Mackintosh School, which at the time was renowned for producing some of the most stunning student work in the country, and where the art of drawing really reached a peak. And I never forgot this, and I still believe that drawing, particularly by hand, is a fundamental skill for any architect. And I will bang the drum about this night and day for the rest of my life, I think. So after leaving Cambridge, I worked in both modernist and traditional practices, as I just didn't know quite what was the right direction for me. I had stints with John Simpson and Robert Adam, where I became an associate director. And then I finally set up my own practice in 2000. In 2008, I was invited to join Yangu Architects. And I hope I've had some small part in the transformation of what was a well-respected but slightly provincial practice into something which has now got a slightly bigger profile. We've got about 35 staff, and we're lucky to be based in one of the country's most beautiful small historic towns in Cirencester. Lovely honey-coloured stone buildings and some of the best landscapes and vernacular buildings there are. So it's been 34 years since I left Scroope Terrace, and by coincidence, I'll show you 34 projects, mostly of mine, either before 2008 or as a design director for Yangu afterwards. And I hope my passions will come through in some of these slides. Now, interesting, I've actually chosen this first slide, which is one of my projects up in Yorkshire. It's actually a well-being retreat centre. And I think it's really important to understand that fundamentally architecture is about people and people in spaces and how spaces make them feel good. This is a very extreme example of, in a way, my version of classicism, but in modernist clothes. And it's a very, very beautiful space, and it actually produces great effects on people who are there. Anyway, I'll go back to actually some of the stuff that I was doing at Cambridge. Now, when I was studying here, there was a prevailing fascination, which was the architectural expression of memory and the centering of the body in space. And it was a time we were studying under amazing people like Dalibor Vézelay, Peter Carl, and Joseph Rickwart. And these people had a profound influence in a whole generation of young architects in the late 1980s. And I was talking to my Kellen there that I think in my year, 7 of my colleagues went on to be heads of schools of architecture in that 1 year, including places like Bath. So it was a really important time for us. Rikver had an amazing worldview of history, and Dalibor and Peter came with their fascination with the idea of corporeal experience, as the sort of Central European sense of traditions of existentialism and phenomenology. It was all intoxicating stuff, and we reveled in how to express this in visual and architectural form. But I guess you can see in some of my work, these early student projects, my own experience of those memories of classical things that I'd seen as a child. But they're fragmentary because maybe I was just too scared to go the whole hog in the School of Architecture, which actually didn't like classicism. So running parallel to these official Cambridge projects, like this one, for example, I started delving into my own sort of deep self-conscious and producing designs which are slightly romantic variant of sort of what I call sublime classicism, fascination with towers, things I'd seen from my childhood. And these were running alongside the official Cambridge projects. So it's kind of 2 lives going on, culminating in extraordinary things that I was doing in my spare time. I'm imagining how university might be dressed in a sort of sublime classicism. I did my thesis, as Frank knows, on a chap called William Playfair, an amazing Scottish architect who was one of the most extraordinary picturesque architects of his period, and loved towers, loved kind of Schenkelian kind of classicism. And I guess in a sense, a combination of that interest in Playfair and my own fascinations for picturesque, etc., have been a driving force all through my professional career. I like drawing classical houses, and these are things that were done in my 21 years of age, whilst I wasn't supposed to be doing things like this. Okay, so I have to absolutely tell you that this was not the official party line at Cambridge, which was out and out modernism. So these were done sort of privately. So you might find it's no great surprise that in my early years of practice and my own account, I actually was still sort of dabbling in modernism as well. And you'll see in some of my projects, there's a definite spread between interest in modernity, the romantic and the classical. And I was very fortunate when I set up my own to be able to act according to my emotions and feelings about context. For example, this is an amazing 18th century estate walled garden, and the family wanted to diversify and create modern office space. It's actually quite a classical project, if you can see. And won an RIB award. It was my first outing in entering the awards, and I fortunately won one. And you can see there's actually an interest in symmetry, albeit in a very different way. And then projects like, for example, the restoration of a castle in Scotland, a grade 1 castle, grade A castle. We won HHA award for this. At the same time as restoring the castle, I was designing buildings in the parkland, very much in a Scottish vernacular tradition, very much enjoying that combination of crow stepping and harling and little gablets, etc. And also at the same time, I was designing small classical houses. And Frank, we're just talking about line render here. Here's an example of a line rendered building. You can see how it patinates. I absolutely love line render, just some most amazing material. Some clients will go, God, I'm not having a rendered building, but it's actually very, very beautiful. So after 10 years or so running my own practice and actually designing things in about 40 counties of England and Scotland, I moved to the Cotswolds and began work on the first major new house. This is another version, view of that house in Wiltshire. So the first major house I did, in fact, indeed, before I actually officially joined Angu, was a replacement house for a lost house by Repton's son, who was an architect. And it was in a surviving 500 acres of parkland in Gloucestershire. The house had gone. So in a way, it was a replacement dwelling, but it was a replacement dwelling of quite considerable scale. And I didn't want to go back to the kind of gawky Repton classicism. You know, it just wasn't very right. It wasn't Wilkins. It was just a bit awkward. And I went to my kind of favorite period, which is sort of mid 18th century, Francis Smith of Warwick kind of architecture with a little bit of Ledoux at the front elevation here. So this is one of our first houses that we started in the practice, and it really kick-started a whole chain of projects. We got amazing publicity from this one. So then a whole series of houses over the last 10 years. Very, very fortunate. We live in a part of the world with beautiful stone. And often our clients actually own their own quarries because there's been an estate, and often there'll be a quarry on the estate. So this is a brand new house for a family who had their own quarry, and the stone was actually quarried from their estate. And this family actually had Germanic roots. So they had commissioned over the centuries sort of houses throughout Holland, Belgium, and Germany. So in a sense, it's a Queen Anne house, but it's actually got some quite Germanic detailing. And I wanted to try and sort of imagine that this house had actually been layered over history. So maybe somebody in the spirit of Schinkel had come along a little bit later and produced a facade, which is very much in the sort of 1820s tradition. I really like this game that you can play with buildings where you can actually play with layers of history. For example, classic kind of swept head, kind of Rococo porch there, but all properly done, you know, family coat of arms, etc. Nice Schinkel detail, you know, very much Germanic, cool versions of classicism in some of the detailing. Beautiful stone. This is Klipschen stone, which is a quarry north of the Cotswolds, but actually produces the best sort of Cotswold type stone. It's got beautiful striations, as you can see, and lovely kind of fossilizations. It's a lovely, lovely stone to work with. You know, little details like this guilloche detail and panels, etc. Having a lot of fun even with fireplaces. I love fireplaces because I see fireplaces almost as a miniature version of the house. And in the entrance hall of this house, we had a lot of fun imagining how William Kent and Vanbrugh might have come together and produced a child like this. So there's some really kind of massive elements, and yet there's quite a lot of delicate detail and a bit of trompe going on in the little urn in the middle of the fireplace, as you can see. Great fun. And amazingly, if you get a craftsman to do a one-off fireplace, I can guarantee you it's a lot less than buying something from Jam or Chesney's, because it actually just is. It's a lot easier. So we always try and tell our clients, please do one-off fireplaces. Here's another house on the Dalesford estate. This would be a typical kind of Yanggu project. Again, a polite mid-18th century looking house. In this particular case, it's got a really lovely eaves bracket and nice detailing, a little bit of kind of almost early 20th century classicism going on with the chimneys and such like. Nice detailing going on in the porch, you know, more kind of neoclassical detailing on the porch detail there. So yeah, we love working in stone, we love the material, we love the craftsmanship, and we also work in brick. So it's the house just outside of Henley in Oxfordshire. Again, classic Palladian composition with wings. And then we go into Hertfordshire and we're more in the brick tradition. And here we have a house, possibly a rectory of 1810, 1820. Very simple detailing, nicely done, appropriate columns, etc. Inside, we love detailing as well. So our staircases always tend to have very well considered balustrading, handrails, etc. And again, with the right craftsman, not difficult to do. Even a sort of reductive kind of Sonian type of detailing going on in some of our projects. This is one up in near Cambridge. This is an entirely new dining room, but we had a kind of reduced sort of Sonian set of details going on, maybe a bit of cockerel there. Not all houses are small. We occasionally do very, very large houses, and we're very, very fortunate about 10 years ago to be commissioned to do what's probably the biggest new classical house, certainly in Gloucestershire, if not probably in the west of England. Magnificent site, 1,000 acres or so, tiny farmhouse on the site, and we were able to get this 57,000 square foot house in replacement. We were able to use very strange planning policies of the day to be able to actually encourage an extension and then swap the extension for this large new house, which again, as you can see, is in my favorite idiom, sort of 1740s Francis Smith kind of tradition, nicely modeled, very, very bold. You can see bold keystones, very bold modeling around the windows. The rear elevation, gentle bow in the middle, nice centerpiece there. And the connection to the wing at the end, the family wing, which I'm actually very pleased with. This is a view from across the park, and my client was amazing. He actually brought in genuine antique fragments from other estates and planted the park up with pieces, so it actually felt as if the house had actually been bedded in for a long time. But it's an entirely brand new house, you know, and I think it's a rather beautiful thing. We loved doing the cartouche with created a new kind of family motto and crest in the middle there, and you can see the detailing is very much, it's in the idiom of between 1720 and 1740, but it's my particular take on it. What I enjoyed about this one is how we linked various elements. And I love the idea of, I wonder where some of our classical architects might have gone if they'd lived another 50 years. And I often think about how, Cockle, etc., might have developed the language to become a lot more almost Art Deco in some ways. So the linking wing here, as you can see, is a very reduced neoclassical thing. 80-foot long kitchen behind that, by the way, 80-foot long, incredible. And in the garden, great fun here. This is actually a garden pavilion. It's actually got a beautifully designed Nicean glass box under it, and the kind of pistum effect temple basically surrounds, all done in oak, weathered with tree trunks in the pediment. And it's just a really fun thing because you go through one world, come through the door, and you're into the stunning parkland. So it actually creates a gate in the classical sense into a parkland from the walled garden. So we're great fun doing that. Inside the house is got a beautiful, beautiful hallway where we really let rip in terms of the detailing. And I do like the conjunction of kind of Baroque with more refined classical forms. And you can see we've got this quite Baroque overmantel to the fireplace, and yet surrounding it, we've got the classic sort of motifs of later classicism. The hallway is a very beautiful space. Unfortunately, we have a very, very private client with this one, and he didn't allow us to fully photograph it. So these are the rare few photographs we've got of this interior. And I think it's probably one of the finest interiors of any new country house. The quality was absolutely stunning. You can see this amazing gallery effect that's been created. We designed everything. We designed every single part of this, all the plasterwork, all the ironwork to the banisters, etc. And very satisfying project. But not all projects are of that scale. And one of the lovely things about working in the Cotswolds is there is an amazing tradition of smaller size manor houses and yeomen's houses. And often built by builders using fashionable pattern books of the day. So this is a new house we just completed outside of Oxford. It's a farmhouse in its scale, but actually there's a little bit of classicism going on in the front of the house. And I think it actually it fits very, very comfortably in the landscape, which you can see is a bit raw at the moment. It's just good to be planted up. But what has struck me over the years in this part of the world is also an incredible pre-18th century tradition of houses, where a lot of the detailing and the compositions are very much from the world of the 16th and 17th centuries. Pattern books like Dittelin and Wiedemann de Vries. And I think it's a very misunderstood part of English classicism, and somewhat vilified, I think, by classicists, because it's not quite right. So I'm going to start mentioning a series of houses we've done in the Cotswolds, which are not strictly classical, but they are very much part of that kind of Cotswold vernacular language with elements of classicism to them. For example, there's a porch in this house which is definitely a classical porch, but the rest of it is a random collection of gables, and it's actually very, very considered to do that, and it's very much the Cotswold look. So this is a small house that we did about 12 years ago. Moving on to larger houses, where again, I'm trying to understand how they were composed, and elements of crude classicism were incorporated into, for example, doorways. And there's a working drawing of our doorways. You've got strapwork doorway. We've got an interesting, slightly crude set of classical references here. But you do get these in a lot of houses in Britain. And this is just an example of I suppose, in a sense, us playing with an arts and crafts stroke sort of historicist Jacobean tradition. It's a beautiful house. Again, Greenfield site. We're amazed we got planning permission for it, and has just been sold again to a family who are spending many, many more millions on it again. So it actually works very, very well. So there you go. There's the door case, talking about the kind of 17th century kind of strapwork influenced door case. And fun, like for example, where the mullioned windows turn the corner, why not make it into a Doric column? And I love these kind of slight mannerist touches. It's great fun to do. Inside, again, on the tradition of doing fireplaces, we love the idea in this house of picking up on that sort of theme of slightly barbaric Jacobean classicism. Barbaric, yeah, but actually I find it absolutely beautiful and fascinating. So we designed a series of fireplaces, you know, which have classical references, but very much are 1600 to 1620, still classical, but, you know, of a particular tradition of classicism. So then there's a sort of jump in some of the work we do where we understand classical references, but we actually, the house has become much more of an arts and crafts ilk. And in a sense, this is what was going on in the country between about 1900 and about 1930. A lot of architects, probably including people like Baker, definitely Lutyens, were picking up on elements of classicism, in other words, in otherwise very asymmetrical compositions. This is a brand new house we've just done up in Cheshire. Again, beautiful stone detailing, but you can see, this is the garden side, but you can see, for example, the references of classicism in the porch detail here, and a kind of banding around the doorway. We love things like this, you know, we love doing little elements of classicism, in other words, quite sort of asymmetrical houses. And we also like doing columns in single pieces of oak, by the way. All of these columns are actually turned from one piece of oak. I think it's a fascinating material to use. Actually, you don't need to do everything in stone. As I say, I've grown up, I've become more and more irresponsible in my use of classicism. I'm increasingly drawn to the architecture of more freestyle houses and masters such as Philip Webb and Norman Shaw. And alongside a great demand always for more conventional classical houses, I'm delighted to say we've been able to move away from this and do a lot more freestyle houses. I'm very honoured that I've become consultant to the Duchess of Cornwall and Lancaster, and also to the Crown Estate. And also in a more conventional design relationship, we've worked alongside Hugh Petter at Adam on Nans Leddon, where I'm building about 100 or so houses. And now and again, I'm called in to do a one-off house. And this is an example of one in Nans Leddon, in Hughes development down in Cornwall, where I'm trying to turn the corner. And you can see all the houses to one side are quite classical, they're quite sort of, you know, central door, etc. But I didn't want to do that here. So I did a little one-off house, and I think it's quite sweet. It's a very popular little house. I know that the Prince was very fond of it. And it's very much in a kind of Bailey Scott Garden City tradition. So moving on here, for example, again, fascination with people like Webb and Shaw. This is a new house we're doing in a very posh suburb of Manchester. And a client who absolutely got that Queen Anne revival language, absolutely understood it, understood sort of Dutch gables, understood the sort of random classicism that you get in that period. And we're hoping to be starting this project quite soon. But again, another example of just how you can use classicism in a more freestyle way. Completely differently. I know I'm in Cambridge at the moment, but we have been asked to do new buildings in Oxford, and probably nobody realizes this is an entirely brand new set of buildings we've just completed in Oxford, completing a Gothic quad. I'm doffing my cap here to people like Champneys and Thomas Jackson, the great architects of the period, who also were very interested in classicism, eclectic classicism in Oxford. And we're very pleased that this has actually become a very popular little building, beautifully done in Clipsham stone, as you can see, detailing just, I would say, sort of sub-Gothic in some ways, you know, moving away from classicism a little bit. I'm very, very fond of this little building. Again, freestyle, but this is a favourite of mine. This is a music room we did in Worcestershire, adding to a Manorist 17th century hunting lodge. The house probably originally had another story on it, and was re-roofed sometime in the 19th century. So a real true kind of Manorist hunting lodge right beside a 12th century church. And for a client who absolutely adored arts and crafts architecture, and actually a fantastic collection of arts and crafts furniture now, artifacts. And one side of the building, yeah, sure, very random, very asymmetrical, pronounced chimney, etc. A little bridge connecting, you can see a little bridge connecting the main house to the music room. Beautiful space inside, by the way. I haven't shown any slides, but it's a stunning space inside. But on the other side, you know, here's classicism. Here's our reductive classicism. We've simply reduced the architrave into a series of very highly modelled, bold surrounds. What was never completed and what actually built was between each of these windows were commissioned a series of ceramic panels with our Arcadian scenes, just to add a little bit of extra detail. And they've ended up not being on the outside of the house, but are now just details inside the house. But this is actually a very, very formal composition in some ways, and it's taking classicism in a slightly different direction. Again, slightly going off-piste, but this is actually a brand new addition to a 15th century castle in Oxfordshire. You can see the remaining tower in the background. An amazing commission. This is all built in Hornton stone with Bath stone dressings. I guess in a few years' time, this house may look as if it's been built in 1520. But again, there are elements of a kind of symmetricizing, kind of classical detailing. Even you find this in Tudor work. There's our staircase tower, which is rather fine. Could almost be a Cambridge college, but it's actually all brand new. And here again, one of the wings, talking about that very early classicism. There are buildings in England dating from as early as the 1520s that have arcading that's clearly come from Italy. The references have come from Italy. And we wanted to pick up on this when we designed the wing of this castle. So you can see the detailing of that in the bottom of this picture. Very interesting project to do. And we we did everything. So all the plaster ceilings are new, all the staircasing and joinery is new. You can see these are very much a kind of 1610, 1620 staircase, main staircase in the building. And even when it came to paneling some of the original rooms, here's the original series of arches from the 15th century castle. And we paneled it in a sort of the way that paneling might have been done in the mid 16th century. Unfortunately, downlights have been positioned in the middle of the plasterwork and the ceiling, which there's nothing to do with us. Absolute nightmare. But then clients are clients. So interesting. Moving on. Many of you may recognize this house. This is Abbotswood by Lutyens. And we're very fortunate. We've done quite a lot of additions to major country houses. But I guess when somebody says to you, do you want to work in a Lutyens house? It's kind of a bit of a big deal. Now, Abbotswood was actually in a rather bad state a few years ago. The glazing bars to the windows had been lost. It had been replaced with kind of plate glass glazing. It was absolutely hideous. So we reworked it, took it back to its original pattern, as you can see here. Very pleased with the results. Again, it's one of the most idiosyncratic and wonderful of all Lutyens compositions. But what was interesting about this was we were also given the opportunity to add a new wing to the Lutyens house, which was a fabulous and fascinating challenge. And here's some of my sketch drawings for that wing. I'll show you work in progress later. There it is. It's been built. It has actually been finished, but we're not allowed to photograph it for privacy reasons, which is a shame because it's a really lovely example of how Lutyens might have done a wing to one of his houses in his later phase of his life. One day we'll get to photograph it. But inside was a real challenge. Again, back to fireplaces. The fireplaces had all been ripped out and been replaced with really bad French fireplaces. And the only evidence we had of these fireplaces was some very grainy photographs that Country Life took in 1912, 1913. So we took this opportunity to imagine how Lutyens might have actually been designing the fireplaces, but with a little bit of a kind of our own twist. And you can see here's a classic example of how Lutyens might have played with the game there, half column, pollinated frieze. These are all brand new fireplaces, by the way, there's a whole suite of them. But going back, go back a bit into the next project there. But how we're playing with a version of classicism with Temple of Versailles order there, for example. And it's kind of completed the house now. We've done the paneling as well. So the house is now closer to being its Lutyens state than it's been since the 1920s. That's a fascinating project. So going back again. So let's move on to another variant of Georgian, which of course Frank will know is Batty Langley Georgian, Sanderson Miller Georgian. And an amazing client, ex-chairman of the National Trust, moving out of the great family house, quite near here, and commissioning us to do a new Dower house. And we're very fortunate we won the Georgian Award for this just a couple of months ago. But I love Batty Langley, I love Sanderson Miller. I think it's just such fun, but it's also classical. He didn't know how to do asymmetry. So it's basically a Gothic version of classicism. And that's what you find in the pattern books. So a new door case, as you can see, Internally, all the joinery done very much in the 1740s, pre kind of Strawberry Hill Gothic. A lot of fun. Outside, little tower element combined with the classical Regency element works very, very well, because that actually contains a magnificent new staircase. Again, done with a kind of light, whimsical 1740s touch. And some of the family's antiques, which I've got in the house. There's the house, and there's the wing, and there's the connecting tower. A very happy client, and a lovely project for us to do. So, I've been fascinated with towers all my life, really. I never thought I'd get the opportunity to do them. And then a few years ago, a little college in Oxford called Harris Manchester College, which nobody's heard about, but has got big ideas for the future, wanted a building to really put them on the map. And the only brief I got was to create a jewel-like building, a jewel in the middle of Oxford. This is New College behind, and this is Mansfield Road, so it's a very, very prominent position. So how do you actually do a new tower in Oxford? Well, what you do is you just make the tower look as if it's possibly always been there, with a kind of whimsical picking up and references from all around the city. I love Thomas Jackson. I love Champneys. I love their amazing historicist eclecticism. And I am an eclectic, there's no question about that. So we have built a tower at a gateway with 5 student rooms, and it now has really put Harris Manchester College on the map. Holywell Street was bisected by Mansfield Road in the 19th century and created this gash down the side. And the 2 buildings on either side were basically just cut down the middle, with kind of flanking, the elevations just basically exposed, half timbering, just exposed a bit of render. So we took the opportunity to refenestrate the return, and everything beyond that is actually brand new. So the more vernacular elements are also new. So the bay windows, a little bit of the railings, etc., culminating in the tower. Again, my favorite Bassai order. I spent a lot of time looking at Christopher Wren's church towers, and obviously couldn't do anything as grand as that. So we did something that's quite fun, and is part of that tradition in Oxford of looking up. Looking up is very important. Looking at the underside of cornices is really important. And also doing quirky things. For example, the corbelling to the little, in a way, Jackson-esque gable is actually done on the angle, because the building's not quite done following the street line. And it's just a little quirk like that you wouldn't notice until you looked up at the building. Nice parge work in the gable as well, with college coat of arms. And a little bit of, dare I say it, Michelangelo going on, the gateway in that British vernacular, British 16th, 17th century tradition of picking up the references, the classical references, not quite right. And looking at the frieze, for example, you can see the Elizabethan version of the nuptials going on there, you know, the little teardrop version, which is very much a sort of British take on it. I say a bit more conventionally Michelangelo at the top, but you know, these gateways are in Oxford, and they are in Cambridge as well, and it's important to note that they're part of the streetscape. The family that basically funded the project. So indeed, how lucky are we? The tower's been spotted by quite a few people. The modernists in Oxford absolutely detested and vilified in the city by the old school 1960s modernists, but the students love it. And a lot of the academics love it as well. So much so that 2 academics have actually been in touch saying we want one ourselves. And we've been very, very lucky that we're actually commissioned now to do new towers. This one in a much more kind of chaste, kind of sort of slight Kent neoclassical manner, with a little, a slightly quirkier, more vernacular top with an observatory on the top layer. Another version, much more in the spirit of Vanbrugh and Hawksmoor, which is rather nice. And back in Oxford again, and I'm making the point to Frank here that a lot of the Oxford colleges seem to want to commission us, but none of the Cambridge colleges do. But very much a tower in a kind of GF Bodley kind of a Gothic fashion. Quite an interesting thing there. We don't know where this one's at, because basically it's probably going to run into problems with planners who want something contemporary, incredibly contemporary, no doubt. So yeah, look, talking of contemporary, I really like contemporary. And I want to make this very, very clear that we do both, and where the context is appropriate, in this particular case in Yorkshire, we've got a grade 1 house, a grade 1 parkland, and a building by Michael Hopkins immediately adjacent to us. So we've got everything contextually thrown up against us. So we're doing a new wellbeing centre, and this is in fact where the yoga pavilion is. You can see it cantilevering over the walled garden now. But I still believe this building is classical, because all of the ratios, all the proportions are actually basically classical proportions. The building is pure, it's functional. It's very much, I suppose it's an Allies and Morrison aesthetic. But this is a pure piece of modernism as far as I'm concerned. It's not attempting to do anything too outrageous, and it sits very comfortably. There's the grade 1 house in the distance. There's the Yorkshire Dales. There's Michael Hopkins' amazing little pavilion, and there's our new building sitting adjacent to it. And it's proved to be a very, very popular venue for people coming for wellbeing retreats, etc. There's a beautiful swimming pool inside it as well. And where we're interfacing with the ancient walled garden and the parkland, I tried to make the building really disappear into a series of glass planes and express the structure, massive I-beams, etc. I think it's very classical in some ways, actually. It's a classical, it's a modern take on classicism. And there's the swimming pool, which is a beautiful, serene space. So, by complete contrast, this is a project literally finished last week on the banks of the Test, commissioned for a new, very, very large fishing lodge, highly romantic building, American client who just wanted something very picturesque, very romantic. This is also lime render, by the way, and shows the effect you can get with lime render. And what I'm trying to imagine here is a sort of version of 1830s cottage ornate architecture, but on the grander scale, which often they were. You can see, and using real kind of asymmetrical compositional techniques, which, funnily enough, have their basis in understanding classical techniques as well. So entirely new house with interiors very much in a kind of Barry-esque kind of Gothic. So this is literally, as you can see, a mad rush to finish the damn thing last week, all the plantings going on, but it's literally sitting on the banks of the River Tess. It's an amazing spot. Again, a sort of example of eclecticism, but sort of understanding where I'm coming from with this. And then, believe it or not, a Mysian Pavilion we're doing at the moment for the director of a very famous franchise of films featuring a boy wizard. This is his pavilion. Interesting enough, he didn't want to go down the Gothic route, but this is so this is his very, very austere Mysian Pavilion. But again, it's based on classical proportions. Okay. So in Scotland at the moment, we're doing a new Dara house on a very famous Scottish estate, running up against planner problems because all Scotland's fascinated with modernism and sustainability and doesn't want anything that looks like this. But we're doing this at the moment. It's going in through planning. So just a very nice kind of lairds house, again, in a William Adam tradition, so 1720s, 1730s, and an absolutely stunning site, regarded probably as the finest site in the whole of Britain. What I haven't shown you is a view from the house, which is just got the whole of the Grampian Mountains in front of it. So this is on the drawing board at the moment. On the drawing board as well is one of many chaste, rather serene classical houses we're doing. Front elevation here, very, very, very restrained, but a little bit of Italianate going on in the rear elevation. So I would say probably we have about 120 projects in the office at any time. And I would say probably 20 or 30 of them are houses of this scale. So hopefully this will get through the planning process and we'll build it. But these are just examples of me drawing and designing these current projects are current. This is a funny one. Country Life ran a competition a couple of months ago to reimagine Buckingham Palace, and I've always remembered being just horrified, I think, as a child going to see it, because I thought, God, what an incredibly ugly building Buckingham Palace is in its own way, and it's just far too austere and too dominating. So I think Francis and Ptolemy, myself, and a couple of others were asked by John Goodall of Country Life to imagine how we could design a romantic version of Buckingham Palace, and I chose again my favourite idioms of a kind of Kent vernacular with a little bit of sewing, you could say sewing, a little bit of cockerel going on there as well, and that was great fun, and we got a lot of publicity for that one as well. And on the other end, we're actually working on a very amazing arts and crafts design, and Kellen very, very kindly helped me to draw this. She coloured it up for me. So we still got this fascination in freestyle architecture in the practice as well. as long as it's beautifully built and it's interesting, we will do a project. We've always said if our clients are nice and interesting, the brief is interesting, and it's in a beautiful location, we are very, very keen to do the project. By complete contrast, and just to finish up, and I know running ahead of time here, this is an amazing new house that we're working on in Hertfordshire, which is a very large new Palladian house, and it's very, very large because they're only just parts of it. But it's interesting, in this particular case, we've got a client who is at the forefront of new technologies and doesn't want the glazing to have any glazing bars. He wants the house to look as if it was one of the pattern books from Palladio or Vitruvius Britannicus. So we've got this interesting challenge of trying to do a house that's very, very architectural, but it's actually very blank in its elevations. And it's very, very difficult because you think about our favorite examples of classicism, the glazing bars are really, really important. So it's quite an odd effect, and we cannot convince them to do otherwise. So it's a very interesting one for us, and a real sort of challenge about what we actually do. But it's a fascinating project, and one that no doubt give us lots of interesting technical challenges going ahead, and talking about solid masonry construction, and he's so into his glazing, he actually bought a glazing company ahead of the project. So we kind of got to use the glazing, it's like, there it is basically. So this is one that's currently in drawing board. We have many, many more, but I just thought that was an interesting run through of the practice, which we are kind of almost proud to be quite eclectic. And I think there's a lot of joy in being eclectic. And I think that comes back to even student days here, and being surrounded by modernists, but also being surrounded by classical architecture and interesting sort of medieval architecture. It's kind of given me a kind of more romantic take on buildings, in particular with British tradition. So there we go. That's the run through. I don't know where we are in terms of time, but I hope that's been useful to you in terms of what we do as a practice. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, Ross, thank you so much for that brilliant run through of your life's work, and also thank your colleague Kellen, who's here with us, for helping set up the presentation and some beautiful rendering as well. I've got a whole side of questions for you here. I'm going to have a chance to ask you a few of them over, which I know. Of course, yeah. But there may be questions coming in online. But perhaps if I could just get started before people in the room collect their thoughts after that sort of dazzling display. I suppose the question that's most in my mind is the one of how, and what you've rather brilliantly demonstrated is you describe yourself as an eclectic, but sometimes eclectics are people who know a little about a lot. You seem to have a very firm grasp of the vocabulary, the techniques of modeling. You show us mostly classicism, but also vernacular buildings, Jacobean buildings, and so forth. Given you've not been taught any of that stuff in an architecture school, how do you get that degree of expertise to be able to so cleverly pluck a detail or conceptualize a building in the style of Francis Smith of Warwick, for example, who probably most people really don't know of?
Yes.
That is a very important architect.
Very important provincial architect, absolutely.
How did you do it?
Right. Okay. Well, this is interesting. It's very interesting, because I think you've got to be, the most important thing is you've got to be passionate about looking at things. You've got to be aware of the incredible history of this country. You've got to be, you can't be too closed intellectually to one idea or another, that's for sure. But that can, as you say, Frank, that can make you kind of random eclectic. Certainly it wasn't taught at Cambridge. It wasn't picked up. There was very good history programs at the university, but it wasn't something that was taught here. I think, and it's a very interesting, my father was a builder. He was an uneducated man. He was a builder. He left school at 13, and he took me around his projects. And I have to say, it embedded itself in me. And I just started to love to look at things and draw things. And I think when you look and draw, you begin to understand. then started investigating architectural history and understanding the periods. I became fascinated by the Elizabethan Jacobean periods at a very strange young age. I don't know why it was. I think my parents took me to see Levens Hall or something like that up in Cumbria, and I ended up working in Levens Hall. The irony was I ended up doing the stable block there years later. But sometimes at impressionable age, you just pick up on things. And I find architectural history absolutely fascinating. And I just think that more and more schools of architecture should really, really ramp up their game when it comes to teaching history.
Well, you're obviously showing by the range of material you're doing. Some obviously bespoke big buildings for one-off clients, but also work for the duchy and so forth, urban stuff or suburban stuff. Living quarters for regular people as well. There's business out there, isn't there? But if I just allow one more.
Yes,
I mean, you mentioned difficulties with planners.
Yes.
As well, you said Scotland was worse than I take you saying England, but you've been doing this stuff for quite a long time now, working in a traditionalist mode. Has it been difficult with the planning authorities? Do you get your museum boxes through or pavilion boxes through much more easily? You classical design through.
Of course, the inevitability is sadly that we've now become completely obsessed with modernism. Sort of in a way culturally in this country, government driven, etc. So planners, of course, I think they're being very clever in promoting modernism, and actually think it's very wrong to promote anything that smacks of historicism or their past. And some planning authorities are worse than others. PPG 80 houses, PPS houses are a classic example of that. How many of them have been through and have been extraordinary modernist exercises? How many of them have been classical houses? Very, very few by comparison. So yes, you do get a rough ride with planners because planners think that we should be going forward all the time. Sustainability is a big thing. And actually, these houses are more sustainable than most because they're built of stone.
That's another my questions.
The reality is they're more sustainable than a cross-laminated timber building.
Well, indeed they are. Yes,
I have to say, but you try convincing a planner who's been brainwashed from above by central government to promote modernism and those materials.
If I can infer, you haven't had to back away and back down and say, sorry, we just can't do this.
No,
you have won.
We have won. We've won 99% of our cases. Sometimes it's been a difficult fight, but we have won. Often, actually, this is an interesting thing, where we've gone in for PPS houses and they've maybe been turned down by so-called committees. They've gone to planning committees, and the planning committees themselves and the local people said, this is bloody good, we want this. So we end up in a situation where it's actually, if it gets to a planning committee and the local ward councillors think this is much prettier than that, as they say, modernist monstrosity that somebody wanted to do, they will back it. So it is a classic example of popular taste versus perceived kind of, a perceived academic approach to things. But it's not to say that I don't appreciate that. And some of the modernist buildings we've been doing, we've also had tremendous support from Historic England and doing a museum box in the middle of parkland, because there's something appropriate about doing that, like making it transparent, making it because it is. So the answer, Frank, is it is very difficult, and Scotland, my homeland at the moment, is proving particularly difficult. You can imagine the reasons for that. It's all to do with breaking apart from history, breaking apart from their kind of oppressed history, and wanting to show. So that it's very interesting that a particularly beautiful site. We are getting grief about why we're not doing a modernist house.
So we have questions coming. I think Rebecca
T
was first hand up.
I wondered if you could talk briefly about the relationship between your buildings and the landscape, and how much control you have over those landscapes, how you design them. I mean, of course, you have your pavilion that acts to gate to landscape, but also when you come to a site, I study the picturesque and kind of facing rooms towards specific views, and obviously a lot of your buildings have an element of asymmetry. So I wonder if part of that is related to landscape. So I wonder if you just
very much so, very much so. I mean, that's all the picturesque tradition is about. Is also about landscape, but it wasn't always conventionally about orientation and actually best view. Sometimes there's some perversities about picturesque buildings, and we've worked on some amazing classic Repton parklands, for example, where so there is the perversity about the design of some of these pavilions. But yes, indeed, we should, as good architects, always be plan driven and function driven. So if the best view happens to be that way, and the best light for the evening happens to be that way, we'll design our house the best way we can. But cussedly, it doesn't always work that way. And if you think something's going to model up better against a mountainous backdrop that way, with attenuation at one end versus the other. We will do it that way. I'll be absolutely cussed about it truly in a very picturesque, sublime way. So indeed, so it's a very interesting question. We're very lucky in the Cotswolds with some stunning landscapes. We're very, very lucky, and we tend to work in a lot of AONBs and parkland settings, national parks as well. So the landscape is my other great passion. Buildings are the number one, the landscape is the second one, and I try not to do anything that will mess up the landscape.
Can I actually do a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
when you talked about the linking wing with the kitchen behind, the
Yeah.
glass linking wing that you did,
yeah.
is the kitchen itself that linking wing,
Yes.
or is the kitchen behind
No,
that?
the kitchen is that linking units on the curve. Yeah, so it actually takes in the best orientation and views. It's actually designed in a way. It's like those classical quadrant houses. You get the quadrants connecting the wings. It's a version of that.
Well,
It just seems to work.
the question is coming from the world expert on quadrant.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. So that's why it was designed.
It
Yes.
struck
Yeah.
me because Wyatt did a linking wing
Indeed.
and a conservatory in front of it, and
Indeed.
this made the kitchen
Yeah.
essentially.
Indeed, there is a more functional kitchen, and there's a more living aspect to that particular part of the kitchen. And it is indeed that. It connects the two, and it's a very, very nice way of doing it. The client got the references as well. He's a very, very educated client. He understood that kind of slightly early 19th century understanding classicism as well. So yeah, I have a good question. Very, very good.
Rebecca T has gone over there. G, sorry. Let's talk on T now, doing G.
So I'm wondering, as an architecture historian, we often think about technical limitations, for example, that might lead to a particular architectural innovation in the design of a building. And I was wondering whether in today's age as an architect that actually, how often are you coming across, technical problems that are then resulting in design choices, or do we live in an age today where basically if you can think of it, you can do it?
Do you know what? I think some architects just really do believe that if you can think of it, you can do it.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant. Yes, you're absolutely right, because we do work with a lot of very conventional materials, okay? And there are limitations about what you can do with those conventional materials, loadings, etc. But I think, to answer your question generally, you're right. Architecture, it did change according to the limits of technology historically. Okay, and we're in a position. We're in a position now we can do a lot of things. So why should I, for example, still do load-bearing masonry on a building? Well, that's in itself a fascinating challenge. That proves its own challenges, and yet something like this one, it's all to do with glass, planar glass, and expression of I-beams, etc. And I could have made that even more fancy, even more kind of demanding in terms of the cantilever. There's a massive cantilever in one part of that building, but I could have made it more and more extreme. I think I'm not too obsessed with the history of technology and what it can do with architecture. It's something I actually did a little piece when I was here on the architectural technology of the early 19th century. So it's something I'm aware of, but I wouldn't say we're obsessed. We can do a lot of things. Interesting enough, a lot of the technologies are not coming in terms of the architectural fabric now, in terms of interiors and the technologies that are available to people in terms of the way people live. Heating systems, ventilation systems, Sonos systems, etc. The sky's the limit. Absolutely. So I think we've got to watch stretching technology, because ultimately it will be unsustainable.
Well, there's link to that as well, I guess.
I think so.
Your load-bearing masonry walls are going to be better for carbon footprint and
completely
for longevity and for recycling than steel or concrete, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely, Frank. Indeed. And many of the great thing about, and we are very lucky in the Cotswolds because we've got quarries all around, great Cotswold stone quarries. So even in terms of carbon footprint, in terms of transportation, if a quarry is 15 miles away, isn't that better than lugging CLT elements from Eastern Europe and logging trees and transporting them up across Europe? Well, it's a no-brainer. I'm sorry, I'm going to be shot down in flames by James, for example, about James Campbell about this. He's obsessed about sustainability now. But you know what? If a building is going to last for 500 years and it's quarried locally, what is more sustainable than that?
There's a question from Matt.
Yeah, just a quick one. Thanks so much for showing us such a range of work. Kind of to follow on from Rebecca's question in a way, I wonder if, or the limitation that more often traditional architects come up against in the late 20th and 21st century is a problem of labour, a problem of skills, and a problem of economics of labour as well. I could wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you've experienced those issues in building practice.
That's really interesting. The bottom line is there is no problem about labour and skills. There is no problem. We are actually in a bit of a golden age. There are so many houses of this ilk being built. So many apprentices are now being taken through. So many craftspeople are being re-educated. For instance, set up these schools of traditional skills, etc. Honestly, if you said to me, do the most complex, highly detailed building, I could tell you there's no problem at all about getting those people out there. Combination of skills and also technologies, cutting technologies. Stonework can be cut digitally now, the most extraordinary detail. So there's no problem about detailing. Materials, you know what? Most of the cost of a building is what goes inside it. It's the ridiculous lengths people go to fit out their bathrooms and kitchens. And I've made a bit of a crusade about getting people to spend the money on the outside. What's the point of a £400,000 kitchen for you when the next person that's going to buy that kitchen is going to rip it out? And that happens all the time. I don't like that. Rip it out, bolt up kitchen. Whereas your building, your fabric is there forever. So the economics actually are quite interesting. Sure, there's no question, you want a well-detailed house in stone, you are talking between £700 and £1,000 a square foot. All right. So it's that level, and people go, blimey. But actually, a lot of that isn't in the materials, it's not in the craftsmanship. It's surprisingly cheap. We got an amazing carved panel done by, in fact, your chap that's done your Yale's.
Oh yeah.
Corin.
Yeah.
Couple of £1,000. Amazing stone carved.
It's great.
Absolutely extraordinary. Now, piece of technology for the house, £20,000, out of date in 10 years' time. It's actually not a problem. It's a perceived problem. There are architects in the classical world who actually go a bit overboard, and their buildings become £2,000 and £3,000 a square foot. They've got amazing commissions, amazing kind of people behind them. But it's absolutely perfectly okay for not your average person, but your average self-made man who's going to build a house to put a lot of that detailing in. Don't you worry about the labour. It's all out there. It's not, there's not a problem. You know, all the craft skills are out there. People doing line plastering, they're all out there. Incredible intricate joinery. They love it. They love it. The builders will stand back and say, that's a bloody good job. You know, we really enjoyed doing that. Can we have another one? It's not a problem. We've got this obsession about the fact that craft skills are dead. They're not at all. It's a brilliant time to be doing amazing building. So, and cost, well, there is the cost, but actually I think, you know, when somebody's spending, we once had a downstairs toilet that had £50,000 worth of mosaics in it, in the downstairs loo. How many beautiful carvings could you get in your building for that? It's just people's choices, you know, it's madness. So yes, the answer is yes, you can build them. It's not a problem. And there are an awful lot of very wealthy, self-made men in this country whose dream is to build a pile.
Are they all men?
And women. Self-made men and women. Yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah. I use it as a term. Yeah.
So I mean, we must close up, Ross, but fascinating talk, and the most recent building of yours I saw, as I told you, was coming unexpectedly on Harris Manchester College in Oxford. After, I have to say, rather a heavy night the night before, being absolutely bowled over by it, and every little bit of it, down to the undergraduate late for the lecture on the bicycle and the weather vane.
Yes,
Top,
yes.
absolutely.
Enjoy these things.
It's hilarious. It's just fun, and
It's fun. People enjoy it.
It's not a negligible college. It has the wonderful Morris class in the chapel.
Yeah.
But you've really certainly put it back on the map.
Interesting.
I'm sorry you're getting the brickbats from the Oxford.
It was we
fraternity.
almost set up a fight because we actually did an article for the Oxford Mail, and the Oxford Mail ran a campaign to support the building, and they had people writing in for or against it, and it was overwhelmingly for the building.
I see.
But the interesting thing about this is good architecture can actually generate more than you think, because when we did that college tower, Paris, Manchester were languishing at the bottom of the Norris table. The year it was finished, they were 4th. Now, I'm not saying that that's our buildings, but I do believe if you do a building that puts you on the map, whole things flow from
Students start to
come. So I think there's value in doing good architecture way beyond the actual buildings. I have to do it.
Well, it comes back to the very point you started with. Architecture is about people.
It's about people and people in space.
If you attend to their needs, then it generates success and happiness.
So.
We've noted in this room your comments on your so far Cambridge's virgin territory for you. We'll do our best to persuade the fellows of Downing College to go for that render on the back of the building, which was a far more economical way of doing it than ashless stone. It would so much enhance Howard Court. And we'll have to see what other jobs we can attract you to do in
it wasn't a pitch for work, by the way. Just
but as we're in we were talking about it, and you've shown us how successful render can be, and of course totally reversible. So
and totally reversible indeed. Chip it off, and there you go.
We'll look for a generous donor to solve this one little aspect of Downing that's not so attractive at the moment. But look, what an enjoyable talk from Ross. Thank you so much, and thank you for coming, everybody, and thank you for coming online as well.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.